Yay, thank you. I'm Claire, and I am thrilled to see almost no one I know. I think I know 4 people here, and I'm used to seeing everybody. Oh yes, I love all the people I know from the past. They're like family to me. But I'm going to get to reach some new folks. I actually have a PhD in biology, and I don't use it except every day when I hang out with my kids. I talk to them about science all the time, and I babysit other people's kids, and I talk to them about science all the time. I'm afraid that for some of you, what I'm going to be telling you is old hat. You already know it all. But I'm coming at it from a different angle, which is somebody who's had a lot of experience in teaching. I've taught junior high, high school a little bit, a lot of college undergrads, and then just lots of children here and there. And fighting with the State Board of Education. I've been very active with that, testifying, writing letters, and so forth. And then just my family, a lot of people I love are deeply religious, which is in and of itself nothing to me. I have lots of religious friends, people I love who are religious. But they are of the flavor that choose to remain steeped in ignorance. They actively avoid new information because they are afraid it will rock their faith. So I come at this from those angles because in my world, I want to increase understanding, and I pick away at their stubbornness just a little bit. With kids, it's easy. They're wide open to it. But some folks, that's where I'm coming from. What I want you can use if you find yourself face to face with a hardcore creationist. Anybody in here a hardcore creationist? The earth is 4,000 years old. You're funny. No, I didn't think so. Hardcore. Well, I'm a hardcore atheist. So, but there are lots of folks out there who believe the earth is only 4,000 years old, and I'm pretty sure that my relatives are some of them. But anyhow. If you're a Sherlock fan like I am, you know what this is. When Sherlock walks through the world, he sees things and interprets what he's seeing. And when he sees that somebody has a ring that's but not worn in a particular way, it means it's been removed often, which means something to him. And so when he sees things when he walks through the world, it means something. I'm sure he could, if he were real, he would look at all of you and know exactly what you did for a living and all that good stuff. When I walk through the world, I do the exact same thing. As somebody who understands science, when I look at the simplest thing like a chair, all the way to the most complicated thing like a star, it means something to me. The chair, metal. Where is that metal found? What kind of metal? What is its tensile strength? What was it? What we needed? What will happen to it in the future? What molecules? About how metal molecules work with each other in order to give either strength or flexibility, and there's tons to know about every little thing, and that's what I see when I look at the world. If you want to get down to the very smallest part, atoms, and then you get down smaller, and you can keep. When I was an undergrad, even a graduate student, which was 20 years ago, we never imagined we'd photograph an atom, or a molecule. Holy cats, we can photograph molecules now. There it is right there. And it looks exactly like what we hypothesized it to look like. Science has tremendous predictive value. That is an amazing thing. To me, that is far more exciting than this. I do not want to disparage anybody's religion. I really don't. I understand it. We all have illusions. I have illusions. And we all know what it's like to be disabused of an illusion It is not an easy thing. So you have to come at it from that angle as well, in my opinion. There are, I can't remember what the next, yes. There is large variation in how people science and educating of others. And you have everything from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is extremely accessible and warm and respectful, to Hitchens, who was the devil in disguise. But they all have their place. They're all good. But in my experience, if I want to reach people in my world, personally, I have to be more on the side where I am understanding of where they're coming from. There are Matt Dillahunty's. If you know who Matt Dillahunty is, he is extraordinarily talented at being Hitchens with kid gloves. I'm not that person. I have to come at the deGrasse Tyson. So, alrighty. We need to keep it simple, in my view, when you're talking to somebody who really doesn't have the background. And they're everywhere. I've talked to our senators, and it's just startling how little they know. You need to start with a pre-flight checklist when you talk to them. Some of the things that they need to understand right from the beginning. You're not even getting to the whys of it, the hows of it, of evolution and so forth. Let's start with what is a theory. The very first thing you need to get across is what a theory is. I know most of you know this, but the person you're talking to who doesn't understand all this probably doesn't. Theory in most people's world means a hunch, as you know. Theory in science is very different. I have a ton of evidence for this thing. Like, I have a ton of evidence for the idea that on a Saturday, blah, blah, blah. But I would never say I have proven that. That's just the way science talk is. You have to. So when you have that slide of information that says something's probably this way, it's called a theory. That's a scientific theory, not a human being sort of theory. There's a difference. So get that out of the way, because that right there is a big problem. Then there are the folks who say, how did life start? That's got nothing to do with evolution. That's a whole worms, and the fact is that if you dig into that, we've got a hell of a lot of it figured out. It's not this vacuum that we think it is. They understand a lot. All you have to do is dig for it, and it's fascinating. We have figured out how to make a lot of these organic chemicals from nothing. It happens on its own. It's amazing stuff. It's not that far-fetched. That's another thing, and we're not even going to talk about that. Oops, sorry about that. Just dropped my thingy. Alrighty. And the other thing that most people don't understand is they just hate because of this whole evolution. Evolution was known before he was wrong. What he did was introduce a theory of how evolution occurred, which was by natural selection. I'm sure you've heard of that before. But natural selection isn't the only way by which evolution occurs. You probably have heard these too. Mutation, genetic drift, sexual selection. Mike will talk about that quite a bit. And then there's coevolution, which you're going to talk about quite a bit. There's all sorts of ways that evolution can occur. But he came up with this natural selection idea, which was groundbreaking, amazing stuff. Prior to then, they didn't know about it. You gotta admire a mind that can come together, come up with that stuff. Okay, so the other thing that's kind of tricky is dealing with microevolution versus macroevolution. But it ends up with favor if you're talking to somebody who knows enough to know about microevolution. Most people will say, well, I accept microevolution. I know things can change. Genes can, the gene frequency or the composition of a group of organisms can change over time. We've seen that with the peppered moths in England over time. Does everybody know about that example? You learned that in science in junior high, where the peppered moth, they were all white, and then the Industrial Revolution turned all the trees black, and so all the white moths were suddenly exposed and could be seen, and then that narrowed that population down to mostly black moths, and then they cleaned up the Industrial Revolution, and the white moths came back because the black ones are getting picked off. That's evolution right there. That's microevolution. They'll accept that. Okay, fine. That's good. It's a hook, because if you can get them to swallow that, you can usually go on. Even if they don't know about the moth example and you don't remember that from me just telling you right now, don't worry about it. You got dogs. Dogs are a fantastic example of microevolution. Yes, it's artificial selection. Yes, human beings drove it. But that there is that much genetic variation in the predecessor, the wolf, to create what we have, it's insanely amazing. Think about that. It blows my mind. And the other thing, the other example that they know, they have to know when it comes to microevolution is antibiotics. We're running out of them. The bacteria we're fighting are outsmarting our antibiotics. They're way ahead of us. That's an evolutionary arms race. That's evolution. That's what people in the creationist camp would term microevolution. Now, a real biologist doesn't really deal with microevolution versus macroevolution. That's kind of contrived. It's a continuum. But let's give you one more example that's a little bit different, because maybe dogs and bacteria aren't exciting to them. Something where it had nothing to do with humans at all, because then those other two humans had it. Something to do with it. Well, we do kind of again here, but we accidentally introduced a crab into the the Northeast, the Atlantic Northeast. And these mussels were not used to it. They were used to other kinds of crabs, but not this kind of crab. In response to the usual crab, they would thicken their shells so that they could be less vulnerable to being eaten. When this one was introduced, they didn't respond to it. It didn't emit any chemicals that it recognized. Slowly over time, 15 years time, that is a blink of an eye. They learned, and I'm going to use the word learned very loosely, sorry about that, biologists, to recognize the foreign crab as also being a threat. And they started thickening their shells in response to that crab. Only in certain populations where that crab was present. That is how new species start. That is amazing. That is microevolution. It happens. You cannot deny it. You'd have to have your fingers in your ears and singing la 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 and eyes closed to not see microevolution. All right. Hopefully by this time they're going, okay, I can see that. Here's the thing, microevolution, easy to understand. Macroevolution, we don't do so well wrapping our minds around time periods that are longer than, really honestly, can you hold in your head the notion of longer than 10 years? Really? 15 years? You can think back 15 years about something or something, but can you really think about that spread? Not really. It's hard. Talk 100 years, 1,000, 10,000, and they just glaze over, especially if they don't have the educational experience of seeing all the things that have happened through time. But if you take all these microevolutionary events that can happen, because we have the genetic diversity in every single organism, you get grand scale changes. And that's what they call macroevolution. And that's where they go, macroevolution can't be true. It's just too crazy. Really? Time, think about it. Think how much time there has been. Okay, so, yay, it came through. I didn't think it was going to actually move. All right, so here's our favorite person. Human beings have extreme difficulty with the two extremes, infinity and finality. And whenever they butt up against those things, they turn to the supernatural in general. It takes a lot of... where does your brain go? If you don't believe in anything supernatural, where does your brain go in order to deal with infinity and finality? Where does it go? It's a bizarre place, if you think about it. And that's hard for a lot of people to understand. So we have to deal with this when we're talking about people. And this is the most wonderful image that I could possibly come up with this. It's a concrete example, pun number 1. 2, 3, I think his name is John McPhee. Did I write it down? Came up with this way of explaining in a concrete fashion the geological time scale. So if you stand like this, and over here at the very edge of my fingernail on this end is when the Earth was formed, and over here on the very edge of my fingernail is when human beings were around. You take a nail file, you scratch off a few molecules of that fingernail over there. That's the 200,000 years that human beings have been around. That's a long time to have stuff happen. I mean, organisms weren't here all the time. They come somewhere over here, I don't remember where. But that's a long time to have stuff happen. You think about how much human beings can change, any other organism can change, and give that time, it's pretty good. So give them that concrete example of geological time, excuse me. Okay, so then you hit them with the good one, the fossils. Fossils do not exist in a vacuum. When we talk about, on the bumper stickers it says, we have the fossils, we win, I think a lot of the creationists, the hardcore creationists, dismiss fossils because they think it's just an old thing that we found in the ground. That's it. And maybe God put it there or whatever. Okay. They don't understand the context and the meaning of a fossil. A fossil by itself does not mean a whole lot. They're right. There are 2 things, there we go, that you should know about fossils. 2 main things. When we talk about having a fossil, their formation is not something just happens willy-nilly everywhere. You're given that impression because they're in the news a lot and people talk about them and they're exciting and we all like to see a dinosaur or T-Rex or whatever fossil. But really, that they form at all is amazing. It has to be in just the right conditions. The animal has to die, and it has to be covered quickly so that decomposition doesn't occur too quickly, and it has to be compressed, and it has to be given time, and there has to be all this stuff, and you get fossils. So if we had just one fossil, just one, that indicated that there was something here before us, just that one, that to me would be plenty of evidence that evolution has occurred. We don't have one. We have millions. One of the most, dare I say, spiritual experiences I ever had was at Pickle Research. They have these giant cavernous buildings, and one of them is filled with fossils that they're working on. And you go in the basement, and there are all the fossils that they haven't yet taken out of their casings. The ceiling is this tall in the basement, and there's just pallets full of fossils, unpajamied. They were still in their pajamas, waiting to come out. Decades and decades and decades of work. And there you could see, because of the shape of the plaster, that this was a giant rib cage with one big rib that went all the way to the ceiling. Holy cats, work on that one next. There are so many of them. Tons and tons of them. And every single one of them is a datum. You cannot say, you've got this one and now this one, and so you need 2 more here. No, these 3 are friggin' amazing. You can't dismiss them just because there's not more of them. That's silly. The other thing about fossils is not just there are a lot of them, which is bizarre and amazing and wonderful, but where they are in the sediment matters. You are always going to find them in the right place. Always. 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 There will be folks who are naysayers that say, oh, we found footprints next to dinosaurs. No, there's an explanation for that. Or we found one turned around. No, there's an explanation for that. You talk to a geologist, they'll have a clean, easy answer for that. Where they are in the earth, on the planet matters too. You might say, oh, well, let me see if I can get this to work. Boop. You have something over here and something over here that look like they came from the same ancestor. That can't work. Yeah, it can. Plate tectonics. At one point, they probably had a common ancestor. And then the land parted, and then you get more than one species coming from these two organisms, from this one organism. That happens all over the planet. We can put together pictures of how plate tectonics and evolution confirm one another. It's not just in a vacuum. They all make sense together. Oh gosh. The predictive value isn't just that you will be able to find out where and when they are, but what they are. Scientists knew, or they hypothesized, for a lot of years before we ever found dinosaurs with feathers, that they probably had feathers, because we're pretty sure birds came from dinosaurs. Bam! You find it. It has predictive value. We're not gathering up a bunch of things and then making a story about it. We have a story and we're making predictions with it over and over again. If you want to find a particular fossil, there's no mystery where to go find it. Talk to a geologist. Let's say that organism is found in this sedimentary layer in this sort of stone, and in geological time it was close to this, and it was blah, 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 blah. You go to China in this area and you should find some. Bam, they will find some. It has predictive value. We have what they want to call proof. Plenty of it. Plenty, plenty, plenty of it. Okay. And if you have the good fortune from them to say something, or them to just ask you even a question. I'm so well known as being the person who tell you that people ask me questions like, what about dinosaurs on the ark? I've had people ask me that. You have the opportunity to educate. When they come to you with a question, you say, evolution is a true fact. There are lots of facts. Some of them are true, some of them are not true. Evolution is a true fact. Okay, good. Well, there's this microevolution thing that you can't deny, in addition to dogs and the superbugs that we're breeding because we're being foolish with antibiotics. And then you can talk about how there is always, always, always a pattern to them, and that pattern makes sense in terms of what we know about plate tectonics and everything else in science. It does not happen in a vacuum. And then you can talk about the predictive value of it. If you know something about biology, if you know something about evolution, if you know about how it works, then you can say, this organism, modern day organism, has this. We should probably find an organism that predates that somehow indicates we're going in that direction. And if you get the answer that you're looking for, well, there's your prediction. It works. And so what happens, and I've had this too. I have gone to Bible study groups. I've been invited. I had a friend who was very religious, and she kept asking me questions, and I said, why don't I just come to your Bible study class? She said, you would do that? I'm like, yeah, no problem. And I got through talking about what I felt and stuff, and the woman, thank you for testing my faith. Okay. But anyway, my hope, and if you're a geek, you'll get this pun, curiosity. You will have sparked some curiosity in them. They will go talk to the person that they have gotten their information from before, often a pastor who has said that God put the bones there or whatever. And they'll go talk to them, and the pastor will say, well, did they say this? And then they come back and ask you that, and then you go, okay, next question. And keep going. And you have started, hopefully, the process of becoming scientifically literate. That's my hope. Thank you. Any questions? Arturo. Oh, okay. What? You first. Ladies first.
So when you're presenting evidence to individuals which might be hostile to the evidence, do you think most of the problem comes in terms of, say, being intellectually lazy or maybe not wanting to deal with uncertainties in knowledge, or what do you think is the biggest driver?
If I'm to be crude, I would say all of the above, but I would never actually imply that. And that's why I don't use big words. I mean, that sounds really patronizing. It is not intended that way. What happens when you use a lot of scientific jargon is they feel like you are playing the smart card and they are therefore stupid, and it shuts it down. Talk to them with normal language. Use incorrect language like, you know, the clams learned to blah, blah, blah. It's a start. If they start thinking about it and they get going on it, then what you hope for is that they will dig deeper, and eventually somebody will introduce the new language to them, or let's hope they go to Google and start looking at it and finding the right words for it. So you said lazy, and what was the other one?
Or not being comfortable with uncertainty.
Yeah, not being comfortable with uncertainty. That's a whole other atheist issue and has really nothing to do with Darwin and evolution, but it can be a scary one. I don't want to mess with anybody's thing that makes them feel happy about the world they live in, and they can believe whatever they want. But if they want to ask me about how I feel about it, how do I deal with uncertainty, then I can tell them. That's a whole other talk, as they say. Yeah, Arturo.
So how do you deal with people that would say, well, I've read that there are scientists that say there's a limit to the power of evolution, and maybe you can find evolution among kinds, but not between large species.
Which scientists?
There's scientists in the books, like...
the books, yes. I would...
I read, there's this Dr. Behe in some university.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Generally speaking, that sort of evidence is produced by a very small group of scientists who are not respected by the vast majority of scientists. And it's not because they think they're stupid. They think it's because they have an agenda and they're trying to fit to it, and the rest of science doesn't have an agenda. Like Bill Nye said, all I need to change my mind is evidence. And the other guy, well, I'll take anything on, but I'm still going to believe in God. There's a difference there in the way they do science. So if you were to read the folks who said, I am entirely evidence-based, you'd find a different picture. The notion that these folks are all in some giant conspiracy against the religious means that you think we're way more organized than we could possibly ever be. It just doesn't work that way. They're each doing their own scientific thing. And then they say, oh, so they're all trained by the man and they all have the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so when you go out in the world, I'm probably running over. You want me to stop? Because I could still talk about this some more.